Welcome, friend, to this gentle journey through the sands of time, where we'll explore one of history's most enigmatic figures. Tonight, we drift back over 3,000 years to ancient Egypt, where power, beauty, and mystery intertwined in ways that still captivate us today. Whether you're settling in for the evening or simply seeking a peaceful escape from the modern world, I'm grateful you've chosen to spend this quiet hour with me. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and what drew you to learn about this fascinating queen, whose legacy continues to spark debate among historians worldwide. If these soothing historical narratives help you unwind, consider subscribing for more stories that blend education with tranquility. We have countless tales waiting to lull you into restful contemplation. This isn't some Hollywood dramatization or simplified textbook summary. This is the real story of Nefertiti, whose very name means the beautiful one has come, and whose reign would reshape an empire and challenge everything we thought we knew about power in the ancient world. Have you ever wondered how a woman could rise to become one of the most powerful rulers in Egyptian history, wielding influence that would echo through millennia? The answer lies not in legend or myth, but in the careful reconstruction of daily life in the royal palace of Akhetaten, where revolutionary ideas about religion, art, and governance were taking shape under the desert sun. What I'm about to reveal will transform your understanding of ancient Egyptian society and the remarkable woman who helped orchestrate one of history's most dramatic religious and cultural revolutions. This wasn't just a beautiful queen standing beside her pharaoh husband. This was a political genius, a religious innovator, and possibly even a ruler in her own right, whose story has been deliberately obscured by those who came after. Today, I'm going to take you inside the private chambers and public ceremonies of Nefertiti's world. You'll witness the intimate moments of royal life, understand the complex web of palace politics she navigated, and discover how she managed to accumulate power in ways that no Egyptian queen had ever attempted before. By the end of this journey, you'll see why her mysterious disappearance from historical records may have been the most brilliant political maneuver in ancient history. But before we enter the perfumed halls of the royal palace, let me paint you the scene of the Egypt into which Nefertiti emerged as a force of transformation. The morning sun rises over the Nile in the year 1353 BCE, casting golden light across a civilization at the height of its power and wealth. Egypt controls territories stretching from Nubia in the south to the Euphrates River in the north. Tribute flows into the royal treasuries from dozens of vassal kingdoms. The gods smile upon the land of the pharaohs, and the people prosper under divine rule that has remained unchanged for over 1,000 years. In the royal palace at Thebes, the day begins before dawn, with the gentle sound of servants preparing for the elaborate rituals that will welcome Ra, the sun god, on his daily journey across the sky. The air is thick with the scent of frankincense and myrrh, precious resins that burn constantly in the sacred chambers. Priests chant ancient hymns in corridors lined with paintings, depicting the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that governs all existence. But this morning is different. In a chamber decorated with images of lotus blossoms and papyrus reeds, a young woman prepares for what may be the most important day of her life. Her name is Nefertiti, though the circumstances of her birth remain shrouded in mystery that has puzzled historians for centuries. Some believe she was born into Egyptian nobility, perhaps the daughter of a high-ranking official named A, who would later become pharaoh himself. Others suggest she arrived in Egypt as a foreign princess, part of a diplomatic marriage alliance that would strengthen ties between great kingdoms. What we know with certainty is that by this morning, Nefertiti has already caught the attention of the young prince who will soon become Pharaoh Akhenaten. Her intelligence, beauty, and sophisticated understanding of court politics have marked her as someone destined for greatness. But as she rises from her bed, attended by servants who have been trained from childhood to anticipate her every need, she cannot yet imagine the extraordinary path that lies ahead. The chamber in which Nefertiti awakens reflects the refined luxury of Egyptian royal life. The walls are painted with scenes from nature rendered in the vibrant blues, greens and golds that Egyptian artists have perfected over millennia. Her bed, crafted from ebony and inlaid with ivory and precious stones, sits beneath a canopy of the finest linen. The floor is covered with reed mats woven in geometric patterns that please the eye while providing comfort for bare feet. As the first rays of sunlight filter through windows positioned to capture the morning light, Nefertiti's personal attendants enter the chamber, carrying vessels of water drawn from the sacred Nile. The water has been perfumed with oils extracted from flowers that bloom in the palace gardens. Rose petals float on the surface, and the entire room fills with their delicate fragrance as the servants prepare for the elaborate bathing ritual that begins each day. The process of preparing Nefertiti for her public appearances is an art form in itself. Her body is cleansed with soaps made from animal fats and plant oils, then anointed with precious unguents that have been imported from the far reaches of the Egyptian Empire. Frankincense from Punt, cedar oil from Lebanon, and rare spices from Asian trading partners combine to create a signature scent that will become associated with her presence throughout the palace. Her hair, naturally dark and lustrous, receives careful attention from skilled cosmeticians who understand that appearance is power in the Egyptian court. They apply henna to enhance its color and luster, then arrange it in elaborate styles that incorporate gold ornaments and precious gems. The famous blue crown that will become her signature headpiece awaits. But for now, her hair flows freely as servants work with practiced precision to create the perfect foundation for the day's royal duties. The application of cosmetics follows rituals that have been refined over generations of Egyptian queens. Ground malachite creates the distinctive green eyeshadow that emphasizes the almond shape of her eyes. Kohl, made from galena and soot, lines her eyes in the dramatic style that has become synonymous with Egyptian beauty. Her lips are tinted with red ochre mixed with animal fat, creating a color that will remain vibrant throughout the long day ahead. But Nefertiti's preparation involves more than mere beautification. Each cosmetic application, each ornament placed upon her body, carries symbolic meaning that reinforces her divine status and political authority. The cobra symbol adorning her crown represents her power to protect Egypt from its enemies. The Ankh symbols incorporated into her jewelry proclaim her role as a giver of life. Even the colors chosen for her garments convey messages about her relationship to the gods and her responsibilities to the people. As her attendants work, Nefertiti reviews the day's schedule with her chief scribe, a learned man who has served the royal family for decades. Today, she will participate in religious ceremonies honoring Amun-Ra, the king of the gods whose cult dominates Egyptian spiritual life. She will receive foreign ambassadors bearing tribute from distant kingdoms. She will hear petitions from nobles seeking royal favor and merchants requesting exclusive trading rights. Each of these activities requires careful preparation and strategic thinking. The religious ceremonies demand perfect knowledge of ancient rituals and the ability to project divine authority before thousands of worshippers. The diplomatic meetings require understanding of complex international relationships and the skill to negotiate agreements that serve Egyptian interests while maintaining peace with powerful neighbors. The court sessions demand wisdom in judging disputes and the political acumen to balance competing factions among the Egyptian nobility. What makes Nefertiti extraordinary is not just her beauty or her royal status, but her intellectual capacity to excel in all these demanding roles simultaneously. Unlike many royal women who focus primarily on ceremonial duties, she has cultivated a deep understanding of statecraft, theology, and economics that allows her to function as a true partner in governance rather than merely a decorative consort. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, Nefertiti's transformation from private individual to public figure nears completion. Her servants drape her in robes of the finest linen, dyed in colors that catch and reflect light with every movement. Gold jewelry crafted by master artisans adorns her neck, wrists, and ankles. The weight of the precious metals serves as a constant reminder of the wealth and power she represents. The final touch is the application of perfume, a blend of rare essences that has been created specifically for her use. The scent combines floral notes with exotic spices, creating an olfactory signature that announces her presence even before she enters a room. In a world where personal hygiene varies dramatically across social classes, the luxury of fine perfumes marks the highest levels of society and reinforces the quasi-divine status of royalty. Now fully prepared for her public duties, Nefertiti pauses before a polished bronze mirror to examine her reflection. The woman who looks back at her represents the culmination of Egyptian artistic and cultural achievement. Every element of her appearance has been calculated to project power, wisdom, and divine favor. She embodies the ideal of Egyptian queenship that has evolved over centuries of pharaonic rule. Behind the perfect exterior lies a mind that is already contemplating changes that will shock the ancient world. Even as she prepares to participate in traditional religious ceremonies, Nefertiti is beginning to question the elaborate pantheon of gods that has dominated Egyptian spirituality for millennia. The seeds of the religious revolution that will define her reign are already taking root in her consciousness, though she does not yet realize the magnitude of the transformation she will help orchestrate. The sound of trumpets echoes through the palace corridors, signaling that the morning ceremonies are about to begin. Nefertiti rises gracefully from her preparation chamber, her movements fluid and confident, despite the weight of her elaborate costume. Her servants fall into formation around her, creating a procession that reflects the hierarchical nature of Egyptian society, while showcasing the queen's supreme status within the royal household. As she walks through corridors lined with painted scenes of Egyptian military victories and divine blessings, Nefertiti embodies the continuity of pharaonic tradition, while unknowingly preparing to revolutionize everything her predecessors have established. The woman who emerges from her private chambers this morning will, within a few short years, help transform Egyptian religion, art, and politics in ways that will reverberate through history long after her mysterious disappearance from the historical record. The morning light, streaming through the palace windows, illuminates not just a beautiful queen preparing for routine royal duties, but a figure who will challenge the foundations of one of history's most enduring civilizations. Her story is just beginning to unfold, and the world will never be quite the same after witnessing the extraordinary reign of the woman whose name means "the beautiful one has come." Name means "the beautiful one has come." The first test of Nefertiti's growing influence comes during the morning audience with the high priest of Amun, a man whose power rivals that of Pharaoh himself. The priest arrives at the palace accompanied by a retinue of lesser clergy, their shaved heads gleaming with sacred oils, their white linen robes spotless in the morning light. For over 1,000 years, the priesthood of Amun has controlled vast wealth, owned enormous tracts of land, and wielded political influence that could make or break royal policies. As Nefertiti enters the great hall where these audiences take place, the very air seems to crackle with unspoken tension. The hall itself is a masterpiece of Egyptian architecture, its massive columns carved to resemble papyrus stalks that seem to support the weight of the heavens themselves. The ceiling is painted with stars and celestial symbols that remind all who enter of the divine order that governs earthly affairs. Light filters down from high windows, creating dramatic shadows that shift throughout the day. The high priest prostrates himself before the royal couple, but even in this gesture of submission, there is something calculated, almost perfunctory, about his movements. His words of greeting follow ancient formulas that have been repeated countless times, But Nefertiti notices subtle changes in inflection that suggest skepticism about the religious reforms that she and Akhenaten have begun to discuss in private. What unfolds during this audience reveals the delicate balance of power that governs Egyptian society. The priest reports on temple activities, agricultural yields from temple lands, and the collection of tribute from foreign territories. Each topic provides an opportunity for subtle negotiation about policies and priorities. The priest's language is respectful but firm when he expresses concerns about proposed changes to traditional festivals. His tone becomes more pointed when he discusses the allocation of resources between different religious institutions. Nefertiti listens with the attention of a student learning the nuances of a complex game. She asks questions that demonstrate her growing understanding of temple finances and religious law. Her inquiries about the education of young priests reveal her interest in influencing the next generation of religious leaders. Most significantly, she begins to introduce ideas about simplified worship practices that could make religious participation more accessible to ordinary Egyptians. The conversation continues for nearly an hour, with each participant carefully probing the boundaries of acceptable discourse. The priest cannot directly challenge royal authority, but he can express reservations about innovations that might disrupt social stability. Nefertiti cannot openly attack the traditional priesthood, but she can plant seeds of doubt about the efficiency and spiritual authenticity of existing practices. As the audience concludes, both sides understand that they have been engaged in the opening moves of a much larger struggle. The priest departs with formal expressions of loyalty and devotion, but his body language suggests deep unease about the direction of royal policy. Nefertiti watches his retreat with the satisfaction of someone who has successfully tested her opponent's defenses and found them strong but not impregnable. The afternoon brings a different type of challenge, as foreign ambassadors arrive to present tribute and negotiate trade agreements. The Egyptian empire at this time extends far beyond the Nile Valley, encompassing territories that require careful diplomatic management to prevent rebellion or invasion. Each delegation that approaches the throne represents a different culture, language, and set of political interests that must be balanced against Egyptian priorities. The first delegation consists of Nubian nobles bearing gold, ivory, and exotic animals from the kingdoms south of Egypt. Their dark skin gleams with oils that carry the scent of distant forests. Their clothing, while adapted to Egyptian court requirements, retains distinctive patterns and ornaments that reflect their cultural heritage. The gifts they present are magnificent, but their true value lies in the message they convey about continued loyalty to Egyptian rule. Nefertiti observes how these foreign nobles interact with Egyptian court protocol. She notices which gestures come naturally and which seem forced or uncomfortable. This attention to detail reflects her growing understanding that successful rule requires not just the projection of power, but also the cultivation of genuine respect and cooperation from diverse populations. The Nubian spokesperson presents his tribute with eloquent phrases that have been carefully prepared to flatter Egyptian sensibilities, while subtly asserting his people's dignity and worth. He speaks of the divine nature of pharaonic rule, but his words also emphasize the mutual benefits of peaceful cooperation between great civilizations. Nefertiti responds with gracious acceptance that acknowledges both Egyptian supremacy and Nubian contributions to imperial prosperity. The next delegation brings different challenges and opportunities. Syrian merchants arrive with samples of luxury goods that Egyptian nobles crave, cedarwood for construction projects, and reports about political developments in regions where Egyptian influence competes with that of other great powers. Their negotiations require careful attention to economic details and strategic implications that could affect Egyptian security for generations. These merchants speak with the confidence of men who understand their own value to Egyptian prosperity. Unlike the Nubian nobles who emphasize loyalty and submission, the Syrians present themselves as indispensable partners whose cooperation must be earned through fair dealing and mutual respect. Their attitude reflects the reality that Egypt's northern territories are less securely controlled than southern provinces and require more sophisticated diplomatic management. Nefertiti participates actively in these discussions, asking detailed questions about trade routes, production capabilities, and political stability in Syrian cities. Her knowledge of commercial practices impresses the merchants, who had expected to deal primarily with male officials focused on military and political concerns. Her ability to discuss technical aspects of textile production, metalworking, and agricultural techniques demonstrates that she has been preparing seriously for her expanding role in governance. The final delegation of the day presents the most complex diplomatic challenge. Mesopotamian representatives arrive with gifts that include cuneiform tablets containing messages from rulers whose power rivals that of Egypt itself. These communications require careful interpretation, not just of language and diplomatic convention, but also of underlying political currents that could lead to cooperation or conflict. The lead ambassador is a man of obvious intelligence and sophistication who has spent years mastering the art of international diplomacy. His presentation of gifts follows Egyptian protocols precisely, but his formal speeches contain subtle references to his homeland's achievements and capabilities that serve as gentle reminders of Mesopotamia's status as an equal rather than a subordinate power. Nefertiti listens to the translation of these messages with the intensity of someone learning lessons that will prove crucial to her future effectiveness as a leader. The Mesopotamian communications discuss proposed marriage alliances, trade agreements, and military cooperation against common enemies. Each topic requires understanding not just of immediate practical concerns, but also of long-term strategic implications for Egyptian security and prosperity. As the diplomatic audiences conclude, Nefertiti has gained valuable experience in the complex art of international relations. She has observed how different cultures approach negotiations, learned to recognize the subtle signals that indicate sincerity or deception, and begun to develop her own style of diplomatic communication that combines Egyptian dignity with genuine interest in foreign perspectives. The evening brings more intimate responsibilities as Nefertiti oversees the education of royal children and the training of young nobles who will someday serve in important government positions. The palace school where this instruction takes place occupies a series of rooms designed to inspire learning and contemplation. The walls are covered with hieroglyphic texts that serve as both decoration and educational material. Tables and stools are arranged to facilitate small group discussions and individual study. Tonight's lesson focuses on the principles of Egyptian law and their application to practical governance problems. The students, ranging in age from 12 to 16, represent the future leadership of Egyptian society. Their education will determine how effectively they serve the empire and how successfully they adapt to the changes that Nefertiti and Akhenaten are beginning to envision. The discussion begins with traditional legal principles that have governed Egyptian society for centuries, but gradually moves toward questions about justice, fairness, and the relationship between law and morality. Nefertiti guides this conversation with skill that reveals her own deep thinking about these fundamental issues. Her questions encourage the students to think critically about inherited assumptions while respecting the wisdom embedded in traditional practices. The students to think critically, acting the wisdom rest assumptions while embed about inherited in traditional practices. As the lesson progresses, Nefertiti introduces scenarios that challenge conventional thinking about royal authority and divine mandate. She presents the students with hypothetical situations where traditional laws might conflict with practical justice, where the needs of common people might require flexibility in established procedures, where foreign customs might offer valuable insights into better governance. One young nobleman raises his hand to ask about the divine nature of pharaonic law. His question reflects the orthodox teaching that royal decrees carry divine authority and therefore cannot be questioned or modified. Nefertiti's response reveals the revolutionary thinking that is beginning to shape her worldview. She suggests that divine authority might express itself through wisdom and compassion, rather than rigid adherence to ancient formulas. The students lean forward as she speaks, sensing that they are hearing ideas that go far beyond their usual instruction. She talks about the possibility that gods might reveal new truths to those who seek them with pure hearts. She discusses the concept that religious practices should serve the spiritual needs of all people rather than just preserving the privileges of established priesthoods. Her words are carefully chosen to avoid direct heresy, but their implications are radical enough to transform Egyptian society. As the educational session concludes, Nefertiti has planted seeds of thought that will grow in the minds of these future leaders. Some will embrace the changes she and Akhenaten will implement. Others will resist them as threats to stability and tradition. But all will remember this evening as the moment when they first glimpsed the possibility that their world might be transformed by new ideas about divinity, justice, and royal responsibility. The night deepens as Nefertiti finally retreats to her private chambers, but her day is far from over. In the quiet hours when the palace settles into sleep, she engages in activities that will prove crucial to her eventual rise to unprecedented power. By lamplight, she studies documents that reveal the inner workings of Egyptian administration. Treasury reports show her the flow of wealth through the empire. Military dispatches inform her about security threats and opportunities for expansion. Religious texts provide insights into the theological foundations of royal authority. Her private study is arranged to facilitate this intensive learning process. Scrolls are organized by topic in cedar chests that preserve them from moisture and insects. A large table provides space for spreading out maps and documents that require simultaneous consultation. Oil lamps positioned at strategic locations ensure adequate lighting without creating shadows that might make reading difficult. Tonight, Nefertiti focuses her attention on reports from provincial administrators describing local conditions throughout the Egyptian empire. These documents reveal details about daily life that rarely reach royal attention through normal channels. She learns about crop failures that threaten local food security. She reads about disputes between different ethnic groups that could escalate into violence if not properly managed. She studies accounts of religious festivals that strengthen community bonds, while sometimes creating opportunities for political dissent. This information provides Nefertiti with understanding that will prove invaluable when she begins to exercise real political power. Unlike many rulers who rely on second-hand reports filtered through multiple layers of bureaucracy, she is developing direct knowledge of conditions throughout Egyptian territory. Her policies will be informed by genuine awareness of how royal decisions affect ordinary people in distant provinces. As she reads, Nefertiti takes careful notes on papyrus sheets that she keeps in a locked chest, accessible only to her most trusted servants. These notes record not just factual information, but also her own analysis of problems and potential solutions. Her handwriting, trained from childhood to meet royal standards, flows across the papyrus with the confidence of someone accustomed to expressing complex ideas in written form. The reports also reveal information about foreign territories that border Egyptian provinces. She learns about tribal movements that might threaten frontier security. She studies accounts of new trade routes that could increase Egyptian wealth if properly exploited. She reads intelligence reports about political changes in neighboring kingdoms that could create opportunities for Egyptian influence or pose threats to existing agreements. This intelligence gathering represents a crucial aspect of Nefertiti's preparation for expanded political authority. She understands that effective rule requires comprehensive knowledge not just of Egyptian territory, but also of the broader regional context within which Egypt operates. Her policies must account for foreign reactions and international implications that could affect Egyptian security and prosperity for generations. The oil lamps burn lower as the night advances, but Nefertiti continues her studies with the dedication of someone who recognizes that knowledge is power in the most literal sense. Each document she masters increases her capacity to participate meaningfully in governmental decisions. Each insight she gains strengthens her position in the complex web of palace politics, determines policy and personnel. Her reading tonight includes correspondence between Egyptian officials and their foreign counterparts. These letters reveal the diplomatic language and negotiating strategies that maintain peaceful relationships while advancing Egyptian interests. She studies the careful phrasing that conveys strength without provocation, the subtle threats that discourage aggression while leaving room for face-saving compromises, the economic incentives that encourage cooperation while maintaining Egyptian advantages. The letters also provide insights into the personalities and motivations of foreign leaders with whom Egypt must deal. She learns about the ambitions that drive their policies, the domestic pressures that constrain their options, the cultural values that shape their worldviews. This psychological understanding will prove crucial when she begins to conduct her own diplomatic negotiations as her influence expands. As the night reaches its deepest hours, Nefertiti turns her attention to religious texts that reveal the theological foundations of Egyptian civilization. These ancient writings describe the relationship between gods and mortals, the divine mandate that justifies royal authority, and the cosmic order that governs all existence. But she reads them with questions that would shock traditional priests and scholars. Her marginalia reveal thinking that challenges orthodox interpretations of divine will and royal responsibility. She questions whether the elaborate rituals that consume enormous resources actually serve spiritual purposes or merely preserve priestly privileges. She wonders whether the multiplicity of gods worshipped throughout Egypt might reflect human confusion rather than divine complexity. She considers whether simpler forms of worship might bring people closer to authentic spiritual truth. These theological investigations are not merely academic exercises. Nefertiti understands that religious reform could provide the foundation for broader changes in Egyptian society. If she and Akhenaten can successfully promote new forms of worship, they might be able to reduce the political power of traditional priesthoods while strengthening direct connections between the royal family and the Egyptian people. The religious texts she studies tonight include hymns and prayers from various periods of Egyptian history. She notices how theological concepts have evolved over time, how different pharaohs have emphasized different aspects of divine authority, how religious practices have adapted to changing social and political circumstances. This historical perspective provides her with precedents for the innovations she is beginning to contemplate. Her reading also includes foreign religious texts that have entered Egypt through trade and diplomatic contact. She studies Mesopotamian creation myths, Syrian fertility rituals, and Nubian ancestor worship practices. These comparative materials suggest that spiritual truth might transcend cultural boundaries, and that Egyptian religion might benefit from incorporating insights developed by other civilizations. As dawn approaches, Nefertiti carefully returns her documents to their proper storage places and extinguishes the oil lamps that have illuminated her nocturnal studies. Her servants will arrive soon to begin the elaborate preparation rituals that transform her from private individual to public figure. But the knowledge she has gained during these quiet hours will inform every aspect of her royal performance throughout the coming day. The woman who rises from her study table as the first light of morning filters through palace windows has spent the night accumulating the intellectual capital that will enable her to reshape Egyptian civilization. Her beauty and royal status provide her with access to power, but her disciplined pursuit of knowledge provides her with the capacity to use that power effectively for purposes that extend far beyond personal ambition. Tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities as Nefertiti continues her remarkable transformation from royal consort to political innovator. The religious revolution that will define her reign is still in its early stages, but the foundations are being laid through nights like this one, when a brilliant mind grapples with the fundamental questions of governance spirituality, and human nature that have shaped civilizations throughout history. Spiritu, that have questions of governance, shaped civil, ality, and human nature, isations throughout history. The transformation that begins during these private study sessions manifests itself publicly when Nefertiti accompanies Akhenaten to the great temple of Amun in Thebes. The morning procession winds through streets lined with thousands of citizens who have gathered to witness the royal couple's participation in the festival of Opet, one of the most important religious celebrations in the Egyptian calendar. The air thrums with the sound of drums and sistrums, while incense creates clouds of fragrant smoke that drift across the assembled crowds. As their golden chariot moves slowly through the throngs of worshippers, Nefertiti observes the faces of ordinary Egyptians with new eyes informed by her nocturnal studies. She sees farmers whose calloused hands reveal lives of backbreaking labor in the fields that feed the empire. She notices craftsmen whose skilled fingers create the beautiful objects that adorn palace walls and temple chambers. She watches mothers holding children whose futures depend on the wisdom of royal decisions made in distant palace chambers. The temple complex of Amun rises before them like a man-made mountain, its massive pylons decorated with carved scenes of pharaonic victories over foreign enemies and domestic rebels. The structure represents over 2 centuries of continuous construction and renovation, each pharaoh adding new chambers and decorative elements to demonstrate his devotion to the god and his commitment to maintaining divine favor for Egypt. The sheer scale of the complex testifies to the enormous wealth that flows through priestly hands and the political influence that such wealth inevitably generates. Inside the temple's first courtyard, hundreds of priests perform rituals that have been repeated daily for generations. Their movements follow patterns established in the earliest dynasties. Their chants echo formulas composed by ancient sages. Their offerings replicate ceremonies that supposedly maintain cosmic order and ensure the Nile's annual flood. The overwhelming sensory experience of sight, sound, and smell creates an atmosphere of otherworldly mystery that reinforces the priest's claims to exclusive knowledge of divine will. But as Nefertiti participates in these ancient ceremonies, her mind processes what she observes with the analytical skills she has developed through months of private study. She notices how the complex rituals serve to exclude ordinary people from direct participation in religious experience. She observes how the priest's monopoly on religious knowledge translates into political influence that can challenge royal authority. She recognizes how the enormous resources consumed by temple activities might be redirected toward projects that would benefit the broader Egyptian population. The high point of the ceremony occurs when the statue of Amun is carried from the inner sanctuary to receive offerings from the royal couple. The god's image, crafted from precious metals and adorned with gems that catch and reflect the flickering light of oil lamps, represents the accumulated artistic achievement of countless generations of Egyptian craftsmen. Yet as Nefertiti presents her offerings of gold and incense, she finds herself questioning whether this elaborate idol truly represents divine presence, or merely human artistry elevated to sacred status through centuries of tradition. Her husband Akhenaten kneels beside her as they recite the prescribed prayers, but she senses his own growing unease with the theological complexities that surround them. The young pharaoh, who inherited a religious system of bewildering complexity, is beginning to yearn for spiritual truth that transcends human interpretation and priestly mediation. Their shared doubts about traditional worship practices create an intellectual bond that strengthens their political partnership, while laying the groundwork for revolutionary changes that will soon reshape Egyptian civilization. The ceremony continues for hours as different aspects of Amun's divine nature receive appropriate recognition through specific rituals and offerings. The priests demonstrate their mastery of ancient texts by reciting lengthy passages without error. The royal couple performs their prescribed roles with perfect dignity and apparent devotion. The assembled worshippers respond with enthusiasm that seems genuine, but might also reflect political necessity in a society where public dissent carries severe penalties. As the formal religious observances conclude, Nefertiti and Akhenaten retire to a private chamber within the temple complex where they can discuss their impressions away from the ears of priests and courtiers who might report their conversations to potential enemies. The room is decorated with paintings depicting the pharaoh's divine nature and his special relationship with the gods. But even these traditional images seem to mock the doubts that are growing in both royal minds. Their conversation begins cautiously, with conventional expressions of satisfaction about the ceremony's successful completion and gratitude for divine favor that continues to bless Egyptian prosperity. But gradually, they begin to voice questions that would be considered heretical if overheard by orthodox believers. They wonder whether the elaborate rituals they have just performed actually accomplish their stated purposes, or merely perpetuate systems that serve human rather than divine interests. Akhenaten shares his growing conviction that divine truth might be simpler and more accessible than the complex theological systems maintained by traditional priesthoods. He speaks of dreams and visions that suggest the possibility of worshipping a single deity whose power encompasses all aspects of existence without requiring mediation by human intermediaries. His words echo ideas that Nefertiti has been developing through her own studies, creating a moment of intellectual communion that strengthens their resolve to pursue religious innovations. Nefertiti responds by describing her observations of how ordinary Egyptians relate to religious practices that often exclude them from meaningful participation. She suggests that spiritual reforms might strengthen rather than weaken royal authority by creating direct connections between the pharaoh and his people that bypass traditional power structures. Her analysis reveals sophisticated understanding of how religious change could serve political purposes, while also addressing genuine spiritual needs. Their discussion continues as the afternoon sun slants through high windows, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the painted walls. They speak of practical challenges that would accompany any attempt to modify established religious practices. They consider the resistance they would face from powerful priestly establishments, whose wealth and influence depend on maintaining existing systems. They evaluate the potential support they might receive from groups that have been marginalized by traditional power structures. Most significantly, they begin to develop concrete plans for implementing the changes they envision. Akhenaten proposes establishing a new capital city where reformed religious practices could be instituted without directly challenging existing temples and their supporters. Nefertiti suggests beginning with subtle modifications to court ceremonies that would gradually accustom people to simpler forms of worship. Their ideas complement each other in ways that suggest the possibility of successful collaboration on projects that will transform Egyptian civilization. As evening approaches, the royal couple prepares to return to the palace, but their private conversation has established the foundation for changes that will soon reshape their world. The religious revolution that will define their reign has moved from theoretical possibility to practical planning. The woman who entered the temple as a traditional Egyptian queen will leave as a co-architect of spiritual and political transformation that will influence human history for millennia. The journey back to the palace provides opportunities for further observation and reflection, as their procession moves through streets now illuminated by torches and oil lamps that create a magical atmosphere in the gathering darkness. Citizens who have spent the day celebrating the festival continue their festivities with dancing, music, and feasting that demonstrate the deep cultural significance of religious observances in Egyptian society. Their joy appears genuine, but Nefertiti notices how their celebrations focus more on community bonding and entertainment than on spiritual devotion to the gods supposedly being honored. These observations reinforce her growing conviction that religious reforms might be welcomed by ordinary people who have been excluded from meaningful participation in traditional worship practices. The elaborate ceremonies that consume enormous resources while serving primarily to enhance priestly prestige, might be replaced by simpler rituals that encourage direct spiritual experience while strengthening social cohesion. Her vision of reformed religious practices begins to encompass not just theological changes, but also social innovations that could benefit the entire Egyptian population. The palace gates close behind them as night settles over the ancient city. But the ideas generated during this day of religious ceremony and private discussion will continue to develop in the weeks and months ahead. The traditional festival of Opet has become the catalyst for revolutionary thinking that will soon manifest itself in concrete changes to Egyptian society. The queen, who participated dutifully in ancient rituals, has emerged as a visionary leader whose intellectual partnership with her husband will reshape one of history's most enduring civilizations. That night, in the privacy of their shared chambers, Nefertiti and Akhenaten continue developing the theological and political framework for the changes they have begun to envision. Their conversations blend spiritual seeking with practical planning as they consider how to implement innovations that will serve both divine truth and earthly governance. The religious revolution that will transform Egypt from a land of many gods to the worship of a single deity takes shape through intimate discussions between two remarkable individuals whose intellectual communion enables unprecedented historical transformation. The following morning brings new challenges as word spreads through the palace that the royal couple has been spending unusual amounts of time in private consultation about religious matters. Courtiers who depend on traditional power structures for their positions and privileges begin to express subtle concerns about potential changes that might threaten their interests. The High Priest of Amun requests another audience to discuss temple finances and festival preparations, but his true purpose involves assessing the extent of royal commitment to established religious practices. Nefertiti recognizes these early signs of potential opposition as natural responses to any hint of significant change in existing systems. Her studies have taught her that successful reform requires careful management of competing interests and gradual implementation of innovations that minimize disruption while maximizing benefits. The political skills she has developed through months of observation and analysis will prove crucial as she and Akhenaten begin to transform their private discussions into public policies. The challenges they face extend beyond religious opposition to include economic disruption, social upheaval, and international complications that could threaten Egyptian security and prosperity. The temple priesthoods control vast wealth that supports not just religious activities, but also educational institutions, charitable programs, and economic enterprises that employ thousands of people throughout the empire. Any reduction in priestly power could have widespread consequences that must be carefully managed to prevent social chaos. Similarly, foreign allies and enemies will be watching Egyptian religious changes for signs of weakness or instability that might create opportunities for territorial expansion or diplomatic advantage. The revolutionary couple must implement their reforms while maintaining the military strength and international prestige that protect Egyptian independence and prosperity. The balance between innovation and stability will require all their combined intelligence and political skill to achieve successfully. Yet despite these daunting challenges, Nefertiti faces the future with confidence, born of careful preparation and intellectual partnership with a pharaoh who shares her vision of transformed Egyptian civilization. The woman who began this journey as a beautiful young queen has developed into a sophisticated political theorist and strategic planner whose capabilities equal or exceed those of any ruler in Egyptian history. Her story is entering its most dramatic phase as private study and reflection give way to public action that will reshape the ancient world. The religious revolution that will establish her as one of history's most influential women is about to begin in earnest, transforming both her personal destiny and the civilization she serves. The teenage girl who entered the royal court with intelligence as her only asset has become the intellectual force behind changes that will influence human development for thousands of years. Her legacy is being written in real time as she prepares to challenge assumptions that have governed Egyptian society since the dawn of recorded history. Egyptian society since time, as she prepares to challenge that have governed assumptions, the dawn of recorded history. As morning breaks over the newly envisioned capital city of Akhetaten, Nefertiti stands at the window of her private chamber, gazing across the construction site that will become the physical manifestation of their revolutionary dreams. The city rises from the desert's sands like a vision materialized, its buildings aligned to catch the first rays of the sun god Aten, whose disk now dominates the royal couple's theological imagination. The sound of thousands of workers echoes across the valley as craftsmen, laborers, and artists collaborate to create something entirely new in human history. The decision to abandon Thebes and establish this new capital represents more than geographical relocation. It symbolizes a complete break with the religious and political traditions that have governed Egypt for over a millennium. Here, away from the ancient temples and established priesthoods, Nefertiti and Akhenaten can implement their vision of simplified worship, direct divine communication, and royal authority unmediated by competing power structures. The Queen's daily routine in Akhetaten reflects the revolutionary changes taking place throughout Egyptian society. Unlike the elaborate ceremonies that characterized royal life in Thebes, her mornings now begin with private devotions to Aten that emphasize personal spiritual connection rather than ritualistic performance. She stands before a simple altar where the rising sun streams through specially designed windows, offering prayers that she and Akhenaten have composed to replace the ancient formulas inherited from previous dynasties. The architectural innovations of Akhetaten support these new religious practices while also serving practical governmental purposes. The royal palace integrates private family quarters with public ceremonial spaces in ways that allow the royal family to project accessibility while maintaining appropriate dignity. Gardens filled with flowering plants create natural settings for informal audiences that contrast dramatically with the formal throne rooms of traditional Egyptian palaces. Nefertiti's morning bath takes place in chambers designed to capture natural light and fresh air, creating an atmosphere of openness that extends to her interactions with servants and attendants. The rigid hierarchies that govern palace life in Thebes have given way to more relaxed relationships that reflect the egalitarian implications of reformed religious beliefs. While appropriate respect for royal status remains essential, the daily interactions between queen and subjects suggest possibilities for social change that extend far beyond theological innovation. The Queen's costume for public appearances has evolved to reflect the artistic revolution accompanying religious reform. Gone are the heavy wigs and elaborate jewelry that characterize traditional Egyptian royal dress. Instead, Nefertiti wears her natural hair beneath a simple blue crown that has become her signature headpiece. Her clothing, while still crafted from the finest materials, emphasizes graceful lines and natural beauty rather than the intimidating magnificence that previous queens used to project divine authority. This artistic transformation reflects deeper changes in how royal power presents itself to Egyptian society. The new style suggests accessibility and humanity while maintaining the dignity essential for effective governance. Foreign visitors to Akhetaten often comment on the refreshing informality of court life compared to the oppressive ceremony that characterizes other ancient capitals. Yet this apparent simplicity masks sophisticated political calculations designed to strengthen royal authority through different methods than those employed by previous dynasties. The morning's first official business involves reviewing reports from construction supervisors who are racing to complete the new capital before the next flooding season. These documents reveal both the extraordinary achievements and persistent challenges involved in creating an entire city from nothing in the middle of the Egyptian desert. thousands of workers labor under conditions that test human endurance while creating monuments that will survive for millennia. Nefertiti studies architectural plans with the attention of someone who understands that physical structures shape social relationships and spiritual experiences. The positioning of temples, the design of public spaces, and the layout of residential districts all reflect conscious decisions about how reformed Egyptian society should function. Her input on these matters demonstrates understanding of urban planning principles that won't be formally articulated by scholars for centuries. The Queen's involvement in construction decisions extends beyond aesthetic considerations to include practical concerns about water supply, waste disposal, and defensive capabilities that will determine whether Akhetaten can function as an effective capital city. Her questions reveal sophisticated grasp of engineering principles and logistical challenges that must be resolved to support a population of tens of thousands in a desert location, far from established agricultural areas and trade routes. Mid-morning brings audiences with provincial governors who have traveled to Akhetaten to report on conditions throughout the Egyptian empire. These meetings provide Nefertiti with direct information about how religious reforms are being received in distant territories, where traditional beliefs remain strong and priestly opposition continues to influence local administration. The reports reveal a complex mixture of compliance, resistance, and confusion as local officials struggle to implement new policies while maintaining social stability. The governor of a southern province describes tensions between supporters and opponents of religious reform that have disrupted traditional festivals and created uncertainty about proper procedures for conducting official business. His account reveals how theological changes generate practical complications that require careful management to prevent local conflicts from escalating into broader rebellions against royal authority. Nefertiti listens to these reports with the attention of a strategist evaluating battlefield conditions. She asks detailed questions about specific incidents, local leadership dynamics, and resource availability that could affect the success of reform implementation. Her responses demonstrate understanding that religious revolution requires not just theological innovation, but also practical solutions to administrative challenges created by changing established procedures. The governor of a northern district presents different concerns related to foreign reactions to Egyptian religious changes. Neighboring kingdoms are watching developments in Egypt for signs of weakness or instability that might create opportunities for territorial expansion or diplomatic advantage. Some foreign rulers have expressed skepticism about the wisdom of abandoning religious traditions that have served Egypt well for centuries, while others seem interested in the potential benefits of simplified theological systems. These international implications require Nefertiti to think beyond domestic considerations to evaluate how religious reforms affect Egypt's position in the complex web of ancient Near Eastern politics. Her questions reveal sophisticated understanding of diplomatic relationships and strategic calculations that must inform decisions about the pace and scope of continued innovations. The balance between internal transformation and external security demands constant attention to competing priorities and potential unintended consequences. The afternoon brings more intimate responsibilities as Nefertiti oversees the education of royal children who will inherit the transformed Egypt that she and Akhenaten are creating. The palace school in Akhetaten reflects revolutionary approaches to learning that emphasize critical thinking and personal spiritual development, rather than mere memorization of traditional texts and formulas. Today's lesson focuses on the new artistic styles that have emerged to express reformed religious concepts. The students, ranging from royal children to young nobles whose families have embraced the new order, work with master craftsmen to create sculptures and paintings that capture their understanding of Aten worship and its implications for human relationships. The emphasis on individual expression, rather than adherence to established artistic conventions, reflects broader changes in how Egyptian society values creativity and innovation. Nefertiti moves among the young artists, offering guidance that reveals her own sophisticated understanding of how visual representation shapes religious and political consciousness. She explains how the naturalistic portrayal of the royal family in new artistic works serves to emphasize their humanity while maintaining their divine authority. Her comments demonstrate awareness that art functions as both aesthetic expression and political communication in ways that can strengthen or weaken governmental effectiveness. The educational session continues with discussions of literature and poetry that celebrate the beauty of natural creation under Aten's benevolent rule. Students read aloud from hymns that Akhenaten has composed to express his theological insights, while also studying traditional Egyptian poetry to understand how literary techniques can be adapted to serve new spiritual purposes. The combination of innovation and continuity reflects broader strategies for managing social change, while preserving valuable cultural achievements. One student raises questions about how the new religious teachings relate to traditional stories about the afterlife and divine judgment that have provided comfort to Egyptians for centuries. Nefertiti's response reveals the careful balance she and Akhenaten have sought to maintain between revolutionary innovation and respect for human needs that transcend particular theological systems. She explains how Aten worship offers hope for eternal life while simplifying the complex procedures that traditional religion required for achieving divine favor. The discussion evolves into broader consideration of how religious beliefs affect daily life and social relationships throughout Egyptian society. Students share observations about changes they have witnessed in their own families and communities as reformed worship practices gradually replace traditional ceremonies. Their comments reveal both enthusiasm for innovations that seem more accessible and authentic, as well as anxiety about abandoning customs that have provided security and meaning for generations. As the educational session concludes, Nefertiti has provided these future leaders with intellectual tools for navigating the challenges they will face as inheritors of a transformed civilization. Her teaching methods emphasize critical thinking and personal responsibility rather than passive acceptance of inherited wisdom, preparing them to continue the process of innovation and adaptation that characterizes their historical moment. The late afternoon brings private time that Nefertiti uses for personal reflection and planning activities that will remain hidden from historical records. In her private study, surrounded by scrolls and tablets that document the progress of religious reform throughout the empire, she continues the analytical work that has enabled her rise to unprecedented influence and authority. Tonight, her attention focuses on intelligence reports describing foreign reactions to Egyptian religious changes and their potential implications for imperial security. The documents reveal a complex mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and opportunism among neighboring rulers who are evaluating whether Egypt's innovations represent strength or vulnerability that might affect regional power balances. The king of Assyria has apparently expressed interest in learning more about Aten worship and its potential benefits for his own kingdom, while also quietly increasing military preparations along borders that adjoin Egyptian territory. This combination of diplomatic engagement and strategic precaution reflects the careful calculations that characterize international relations during periods of significant change in major powers. Mesopotamian merchants report growing demand for Egyptian artistic works that reflect the new naturalistic style, suggesting that cultural innovations may provide economic opportunities that could strengthen Egypt's international position. At the same time, these same merchants describe conversations with local rulers who question whether religious reforms indicate declining Egyptian military capability or political instability that might be exploited by aggressive neighbors. Nefertiti studies these reports with the attention of a strategist, evaluating multiple scenarios and their potential implications for Egyptian security and prosperity. Her marginal notes reveal thinking that extends far beyond immediate tactical concerns to encompass long-term strategic planning for maintaining Egyptian dominance in a changing international environment. The religious revolution she has helped orchestrate must succeed not just domestically, but also in the context of complex foreign relationships that could determine the empire's survival. The intelligence documents also contain information about internal opposition to religious reforms that continues despite the apparent success of the new capital and its innovative institutions. Traditional priests who lost influence when the court moved to Akhetaten have not abandoned their efforts to restore the old religious system and their own privileged positions within it. Their activities range from passive resistance to active conspiracy aimed at undermining royal authority and eventually reversing the changes that have transformed Egyptian society. These domestic threats require different responses than foreign challenges, but they may be equally dangerous to the success of the revolutionary project that defines Nefertiti's historical significance. Her analysis of opposition activities reveals sophisticated understanding of how to counter political resistance while avoiding actions that might validate critics' claims about the authoritarian implications of religious reform. The reports describe specific incidents where traditional priests have attempted to maintain old ceremonies in defiance of royal edicts, where local officials have quietly ignored instructions to implement new procedures, and where wealthy families have continued supporting temples and religious practices that officially no longer receive royal approval. Each incident requires careful evaluation of appropriate responses that will maintain governmental authority without creating martyrs or symbols that opposition groups could use to rally broader resistance. Nefertiti's notes reveal strategic thinking about how to manage these challenges through combination of enforcement measures and positive incentives that could gradually win over skeptical populations. Her approach emphasizes the benefits that religious reforms provide to ordinary Egyptians rather than simply demanding compliance with royal authority. This sophisticated understanding of political psychology reflects lessons learned through years of careful observation and analysis. As night deepens over Akhetaten, the Queen continues her private studies with documents that explore the theological foundations of the reforms she has helped implement. These texts represent her own contributions to the intellectual framework supporting Aten worship and its implications for human understanding of divine nature and cosmic order. Her theological writings, if they survive the destruction that will follow her mysterious disappearance, would reveal a mind of extraordinary sophistication, grappling with fundamental questions about reality, consciousness, and human purpose. The theological documents reveal thinking that goes far beyond simple rejection of traditional Egyptian polytheism to encompass positive vision of spiritual truth that could transform human civilization. Nefertiti's concept of divine unity suggests possibilities for social harmony and international cooperation that transcend the tribal loyalties and sectarian conflicts that characterize most ancient societies. Her ideas about direct spiritual communication between individuals and divine reality offer hope for personal fulfillment that doesn't depend on mediation by powerful institutions or privileged classes. These revolutionary theological concepts have practical implications that extend throughout Egyptian society and potentially beyond its borders to influence human development in directions that won't be fully realized for centuries or millennia. The woman who began her career as a beautiful young queen has evolved into a religious philosopher whose ideas could reshape human understanding of existence itself if they survive the political forces that are already gathering to destroy everything she has helped create. The oil lamps burn lower as Nefertiti concludes her nightly studies and prepares for sleep in chambers designed to capture the first rays of tomorrow's sunrise. The city she has helped create sleeps around her, its streets and buildings representing humanity's first experiment in creating a society based on direct spiritual truth rather than inherited tradition and institutional authority. The success or failure of this extraordinary experiment will determine not just her personal legacy, but the future direction of human civilization. The woman who will awaken to face new challenges and opportunities in the morning has spent another night accumulating the intellectual and spiritual resources that will enable her to continue reshaping the ancient world. Her story is approaching its climactic phase as the forces supporting and opposing religious revolution prepare for confrontations that will determine whether the innovations of Akhetaten represent a permanent transformation of human consciousness, or merely a brief interruption in the eternal cycle of tradition and authority that has governed most societies throughout history. A brief human consciousness, or merely throughout interru cycle of tradition, in the eternal that and authority most societies has governed history. The morning light streaming through the specially designed windows of Nefertiti's chamber illuminates a scene that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. The queen rises not to the sound of traditional temple bells calling the faithful to ancient rituals, but to the gentle murmur of construction workers already beginning their daily labor on the revolutionary city taking shape around her. The air carries the scent of fresh limestone dust and cedarwood, mingling with the familiar perfumes that her servants prepare for the daily transformation from private woman to public symbol. But this morning brings an unexpected visitor who will test every political skill Nefertiti has developed during her remarkable ascent to power. A messenger arrives before dawn with urgent dispatches from the old capital. His dust-covered clothing, an exhausted horse testament to the speed with which he has traveled across the desert. The scrolls he carries bear the seal of the military commander stationed at Thebes, and their contents reveal a crisis that threatens to unravel everything she and Akhenaten have built. The reports describe coordinated uprisings in 3 different provinces, each apparently triggered by local priests who have convinced their populations that the abandonment of traditional gods has brought divine punishment upon Egypt. Crop failures, unusual flooding patterns, and isolated attacks by desert nomads have been interpreted as evidence that the ancient deities demand restoration of proper worship and the return of royal authority to Thebes. The military commander writes with barely concealed urgency that immediate action is required to prevent these separate incidents from coalescing into empire-wide rebellion. Nefertiti reads these dispatches with the calm attention of someone who has anticipated such challenges and prepared responses for exactly this type of crisis. Her years of studying provincial administration and intelligence gathering have taught her to distinguish between genuine popular discontent and manufactured opposition orchestrated by groups with specific political agendas. The patterns described in these reports suggest careful coordination rather than spontaneous religious fervor, indicating that traditional priesthoods have moved beyond passive resistance to active subversion. The Queen's response to this crisis reveals the sophisticated political intelligence she has developed through years of careful observation and strategic planning. Rather than panicking or demanding immediate military suppression of the uprisings, she begins analyzing the specific circumstances of each incident to identify vulnerabilities that can be exploited to restore order while strengthening rather than weakening the reformed religious system. Her marginal notes on the military dispatches reveal thinking that extends far beyond short-term tactical responses to encompass long-term strategic considerations about how to consolidate revolutionary changes in the face of organized opposition. The first uprising, in a province near the Nubian border, appears to have been triggered by a combination of genuine agricultural problems and deliberate misinformation spread by priests who retained local influence despite official policy changes. The population's anxiety about crop failures has been channeled into religious explanations that blame abandonment of traditional deities, rather than addressing practical issues related to irrigation and seed quality that could be resolved through governmental intervention. Nefertiti's analysis identifies this situation as an opportunity to demonstrate the practical benefits of reformed administration, while countering theological arguments through concrete improvements in local conditions. She drafts instructions for emergency grain shipments from royal warehouses, technical assistance for improving agricultural techniques, and carefully planned religious ceremonies that will associate Aten worship with practical solutions to immediate problems. Her approach combines immediate relief with long-term relationship building that could transform potential opponents into supporters of continued innovation. The second uprising presents different challenges and opportunities because it involves urban populations whose concerns focus more on economic disruption than agricultural difficulties. Craftsmen and merchants in a major trading center have been told that foreign buyers are avoiding Egyptian goods because international customers have lost confidence in the stability of a kingdom that has abandoned its traditional religious foundations. The economic anxiety created by these claims has been exploited by local religious leaders who promise that restoration of ancient worship practices will restore commercial prosperity. The Queen's response to this urban crisis demonstrates her sophisticated understanding of how economic and religious concerns intersect in ways that require integrated solutions addressing multiple aspects of public anxiety simultaneously. She authorizes emergency funds for public works projects that will provide immediate employment while creating infrastructure improvements that serve long-term economic development. More subtly, she arranges for foreign merchants who have continued trading with Egypt to visit the affected city and publicly demonstrate their confidence in Egyptian goods and governmental stability. These economic interventions are accompanied by religious programming designed to associate Aten worship with commercial prosperity rather than economic disruption. The Queen commissions artistic works celebrating the natural abundance that flows from divine blessing, sponsors festivals that combine spiritual observance with market activities, and arranges for successful merchants who have embraced reformed religious practices to share their experiences with skeptical colleagues. Her multi-layered approach addresses both immediate practical concerns and underlying theological questions that fuel opposition to continued innovation. The Third Uprising proves most challenging because it involves military personnel whose loyalty is essential for maintaining governmental authority throughout the empire. A garrison commander in a strategic frontier post has apparently been convinced that religious reforms have weakened Egyptian military effectiveness by abandoning gods who traditionally protected Egyptian armies in battle. His concerns have been amplified by recent raids by nomadic tribes who may have interpreted the establishment of Akhetaten as evidence of Egyptian weakness or distraction from border security. Nefertiti's analysis of this military crisis reveals the complex intersection of religious, political, and strategic considerations that characterize leadership during periods of revolutionary change. The loyalty of military commanders cannot be taken for granted when innovations challenge beliefs and practices that have provided psychological foundations for professional effectiveness. Yet suppressing military dissent through authoritarian measures could create exactly the kind of governmental instability that would validate concerns about the destabilizing effects of religious reform. The Queen's response to military opposition demonstrates the strategic brilliance that has enabled her unprecedented rise to political influence. Rather than relying solely on assertions of royal authority or theological arguments about Aten's protective power, she addresses practical military concerns through concrete improvements in equipment, training, and strategic support that enhance rather than compromise defensive capabilities. Her approach recognizes that successful religious revolution requires demonstrating superior results rather than merely demanding compliance with new beliefs. Emergency dispatches flow from Akhetaten to frontier commands throughout the empire, carrying not just royal edicts about proper religious observance, but also detailed instructions for improved military procedures that incorporate lessons learned from recent tactical innovations. The Queen's personal involvement in military planning surprises commanders who had not previously recognized her expertise in strategic matters. But her recommendations prove so practical and effective that skepticism gradually gives way to grudging respect for her analytical capabilities. The crisis management activities consume most of Nefertiti's morning, but they also provide opportunities to demonstrate leadership qualities that extend far beyond ceremonial duties typically associated with royal women. Provincial governors who receive her detailed instructions for managing local difficulties recognize that they are dealing with someone who possesses comprehensive understanding of administrative challenges and practical solutions that serve both immediate needs and long-term strategic objectives. Her reputation for governmental competence spreads throughout the imperial bureaucracy as officials discover that her involvement in policy decisions produces superior results. By midday, the immediate crisis has been contained through a combination of rapid response measures and strategic communications that address both practical concerns and underlying anxieties about religious innovation. But Nefertiti understands that these uprisings represent early manifestations of opposition that will continue growing unless the fundamental issues driving resistance to reform are resolved through more comprehensive approaches to social and political transformation. The afternoon brings meetings with advisors and officials who have traveled to Akhenaten to discuss longer-term strategies for consolidating revolutionary changes while preventing future crises that could threaten the survival of everything she and Akhenaten have accomplished. These discussions reveal the extraordinary complexity of managing social transformation in a civilization that has operated according to established patterns for over 1,000 years. Every innovation creates ripple effects that generate unexpected consequences, requiring constant adjustment and refinement of policies and procedures. The Queen's participation in these strategic planning sessions demonstrates intellectual capabilities that impress even experienced administrators who have served multiple pharaohs throughout their careers. Her questions reveal understanding of interconnections between different aspects of governmental operations that enables comprehensive approaches to problem solving. Her suggestions consistently identify solutions that address multiple concerns simultaneously while advancing, rather than compromising, the broader objectives of religious and social reform. One senior advisor raises concerns about the long-term sustainability of innovations that depend heavily on personal authority and charismatic leadership rather than institutional structures that could survive changes in royal personnel. His questions force Nefertiti to articulate her vision for creating permanent foundations for reform society that transcend individual rulers or specific political circumstances. Her responses reveal sophisticated thinking about how to institutionalize revolutionary changes while maintaining flexibility for continued adaptation and improvement. The discussion evolves into detailed consideration of educational systems that could prepare future generations of Egyptians to function effectively in transformed social and religious environments. Traditional education had focused primarily on training scribes and administrators to maintain existing procedures, but reformed society requires citizens capable of critical thinking and personal responsibility that enable continued innovation and adaptation to changing circumstances. Nefertiti's contributions to educational planning reflect her understanding that lasting social transformation requires not just new policies, but also new ways of thinking that become embedded in cultural practices and personal habits. The schools being established throughout Akhenaten serve as laboratories for pedagogical experiments that could eventually spread throughout the empire, creating populations capable of supporting and extending the innovations that define their historical moment. The strategic planning sessions continue into the evening as participants grapple with challenges that have no precedence in Egyptian history. The creation of an entirely new capital city represents just one aspect of transformations that encompass every dimension of social organization, from religious practice to artistic expression to economic relationships. The complexity of managing simultaneous changes across multiple domains requires coordination and communication capabilities that strain existing governmental structures. Yet despite these daunting challenges, the mood in the planning sessions remains optimistic as participants recognize that they are creating something unprecedented in human history. The combination of idealistic vision and practical competence that characterizes Nefertiti's leadership provides confidence that current difficulties can be overcome through continued application of intelligence, dedication, and collaborative effort. The woman who began her career as a beautiful young queen has evolved into the intellectual architect of a civilizational transformation that could influence human development for millennia. As night falls over Akhenaten, the queen retreats to her private chambers for the personal reflection and study that has sustained her throughout the most challenging period of her remarkable career. Tonight's reading includes reports from foreign observers who have visited the new capital and recorded their impressions of Egyptian innovations for transmission to their own rulers. These external perspectives provide valuable insights into how the revolutionary experiment appears to outsiders who lack emotional investment in its success or failure. The foreign reports reveal a mixture of admiration, skepticism, and concern that reflects the complex implications of Egyptian religious and social transformation for regional stability and international relationships. Some visitors express enthusiasm for innovations that seem to offer solutions to problems that plague their own societies. Others worry about the precedent that successful Egyptian reforms might establish for popular expectations about governmental responsiveness and religious accessibility in their own kingdoms. Most significantly, several foreign observers comment on the unprecedented role that Nefertiti appears to play in Egyptian governmental operations. Traditional expectations about royal women's proper functions do not adequately describe her obvious involvement in policy decisions and administrative management that extends far beyond ceremonial duties. Her influence seems to transcend cultural boundaries that typically limit female participation in political activities, creating possibilities that could inspire similar developments in other societies. These international perspectives on her achievements provide Nefertiti with validation that her innovations represent genuine advances in human organizational capabilities, rather than merely local adaptations to specific Egyptian circumstances. The universal human problems that her solutions address suggest that successful reforms could eventually spread beyond Egyptian borders to influence developments throughout the ancient world, and possibly beyond. The foreign reports also contain intelligence about political developments in neighboring kingdoms that could affect Egyptian security and the long-term viability of the experimental society being created at Akhetaten. Regional power balances are shifting as established rulers evaluate whether Egyptian innovations represent opportunities for alliance or threats that require defensive measures. The success or failure of Nefertiti's reforms will influence not just Egyptian civilization, but also the broader trajectory of human social and political development. As she studies these international perspectives on her achievements, Nefertiti recognizes that her personal destiny has become inseparable from the fate of revolutionary changes that extend far beyond individual ambition or even national interests. The teenage girl who entered the royal court with intelligence as her primary asset has become a historical figure whose decisions will influence the development of human civilization for centuries or millennia. The weight of this responsibility shapes every choice she makes as she continues navigating challenges that no previous ruler has faced. The night deepens as the Queen continues her private studies, but tomorrow will bring new opportunities to demonstrate that the impossible dream of transformed human society can become practical reality through sustained application of intelligence, dedication, and collaborative effort. Her story is entering its most crucial phase as the forces supporting and opposing revolutionary change prepare for confrontations that will determine whether Akhetaten represents humanity's future or merely an ambitious experiment that could not survive the eternal human tendency to revert to familiar patterns and traditional authorities. The oil lamps flicker in the desert breeze as Nefertiti prepares for sleep in chambers designed to capture tomorrow's sunrise, symbol of the eternal renewal that her reforms promise to bring to human civilization. The woman who has achieved unprecedented influence through intelligence and determination faces the future with confidence born of careful preparation and unwavering commitment to ideals that transcend personal ambition. Her legacy is being written through daily choices that demonstrate the possibility of transforming ancient patterns of human organization into something entirely new and potentially magnificent. Determination faces an unwavering commitment towards the future with confidence, being of careful preparation, and unknew her legacy is dailials that transcend personal ambition, written through choices that demonstrate into something entirely new and potentially magnificent. The of human, of transforming ancient organization possibility patterns. The dawn of Nefertiti's 15th year as queen brings whispers that will forever alter the course of Egyptian history. In the corridors of Akhenaten, servants speak in hushed tones about the queen's increasing absences from public ceremonies. Palace scribes notice that official documents now bear unfamiliar seals alongside the traditional royal cartouches. Most mysteriously, construction workers report that new chambers are being built in the deepest sections of the palace complex, their purpose known only to a select few who have sworn secret oaths of silence. What the common people cannot see is the extraordinary transformation taking place within the Queen's private world. Each morning now begins not with the familiar rituals of royal preparation, but with clandestine meetings in chambers that do not appear on any official palace map. Here, in rooms lit only by carefully positioned oil lamps, Nefertiti receives visitors whose identities would shock the Egyptian nobility if they were ever discovered. The first to arrive is always Khaem Wasset, a master craftsman whose calloused hands betray decades of working with precious metals and rare stones. But his true value lies not in his artistic abilities, but in his comprehensive knowledge of the secret passages that honeycomb the ancient temples of Thebes. His detailed sketches reveal hidden chambers where the old priesthood has been quietly accumulating weapons and gold, preparing for a confrontation that could plunge Egypt into civil war. Following him comes Amenemheb, a merchant whose trading expeditions have taken him to the far reaches of the known world. His weathered face speaks of years spent navigating the dangerous currents of international commerce, but his reports focus on something far more valuable than trade routes or commodity prices. He brings intelligence about foreign rulers who are watching Egyptian religious reforms with intense interest, evaluating whether the revolutionary changes represent weakness to be exploited or strength to be emulated. The third regular visitor remains the most enigmatic. Known only as the scribe of hidden things, this individual arrives wrapped in common robes that conceal both identity and gender. The scrolls this mysterious figure carries contain information that could destabilize governments throughout the ancient world. Lists of corrupt officials in distant provinces, details about secret alliances between supposedly loyal vassals, evidence of foreign plots against Egyptian interests. Most crucially, these documents reveal the existence of underground networks that span the entire Mediterranean world, connecting merchants, priests, and nobles in webs of mutual obligation that transcend national boundaries. Nefertiti absorbs this intelligence with the focused attention of a master strategist preparing for the most complex campaign in Egyptian history. The information she receives confirms her growing suspicion that the opposition to religious reform extends far beyond domestic resistance to encompass international conspiracies aimed at preventing the spread of innovations that could transform human civilization. The traditional priesthoods of multiple kingdoms have apparently recognized that successful Egyptian reforms could inspire similar movements in their own territories, threatening established power structures throughout the ancient world. Her response to these revelations demonstrates the extraordinary evolution of her strategic thinking over the past decade. Rather than viewing the international dimension of opposition as an insurmountable obstacle, she begins to perceive it as an opportunity to create alliances with progressive forces in foreign kingdoms who share her vision of religious and social transformation. The intelligence networks she has cultivated provide her with contacts among reformist movements that most rulers don't even know exist. The morning meetings conclude with detailed planning sessions, where Nefertiti and her advisors develop responses to specific threats, while advancing broader objectives that could reshape the ancient world. Today's focus centers on a particularly delicate operation that requires coordination between Egyptian agents and sympathetic allies in 3 different kingdoms. The goal involves more than simple intelligence gathering or diplomatic negotiation. They are planning to establish the first international network of reformed religious communities that could eventually challenge traditional power structures throughout the Mediterranean region. The complexity of this undertaking requires Nefertiti to demonstrate capabilities that extend far beyond anything expected from royal women in ancient societies. She must understand the theological implications of different reform movements, evaluate the political risks of supporting foreign dissidents, and coordinate activities across vast distances, using communication methods that could be intercepted by hostile intelligence services. Her success in managing these multifaceted challenges reveals intellectual and organizational abilities that equal those of history's greatest rulers. As the secret meetings conclude, Nefertiti emerges into the public areas of the palace, transformed once again into the serene and gracious queen that her subjects expect to see. But now, her public performances serve a dual purpose, projecting the stability and confidence necessary for maintaining domestic support, while concealing the revolutionary activities that could either elevate Egypt to unprecedented heights or destroy everything she and Akhenaten have built. The transition from private strategist to public figure requires extraordinary psychological discipline as she moves seamlessly between radically different roles within the same morning. The servants who assist with her transformation from meeting participant to royal icon have no idea that the woman they are preparing for public appearance has just spent hours planning operations that could influence the course of human history for millennia. Her public schedule begins with a ceremony dedicating new agricultural terraces that will increase food production for Akhenaten's growing population. The event provides opportunities to demonstrate the practical benefits of reformed administration, while reinforcing popular support for continued innovations. As she moves among the assembled farmers and engineers, Nefertiti's questions reveal detailed understanding of irrigation techniques, soil management, and crop rotation patterns that enable more efficient food production than traditional Egyptian methods. But even during this seemingly routine ceremonial appearance, her trained eye observes details that others miss. The positioning of guards suggests concern about potential security threats. The composition of the crowd includes individuals whose presence seems designed to gather intelligence rather than celebrate agricultural achievements. Most significantly, several foreign observers are recording the proceedings with obvious interest in technical innovations that could be adapted for use in their own territories. These observations inform real-time adjustments to her public presentation, as she emphasizes certain aspects of the reforms while downplaying others based on her assessment of who is watching and what information should or should not be shared. Her ability to conduct multiple levels of analysis simultaneously while maintaining the appearance of casual engagement demonstrates the extraordinary mental agility that has enabled her unprecedented rise to influence and authority. The agricultural ceremony concludes with ritual offerings to Aten that incorporate traditional elements designed to reassure conservative observers, while introducing subtle innovations that advance the broader program of religious reform. Nefertiti's performance during these religious observances reveals her sophisticated understanding of how spiritual practices can be modified gradually without triggering the kind of dramatic resistance that could destabilize reform efforts. The afternoon brings a different type of challenge, as she receives a delegation of Mesopotamian merchants whose ostensible purpose involves negotiating trade agreements for luxury goods. But her intelligence sources have revealed that at least 3 members of this delegation are actually agents of a foreign ruler who is evaluating Egyptian military capabilities and political stability. The meeting requires her to project confidence and competence, while carefully controlling what information the visitors can observe or deduce about Egyptian strengths and vulnerabilities. The negotiations take place in a reception hall designed to impress foreign visitors while providing subtle advantages to Egyptian negotiators. The positioning of seats ensures that sunlight streaming through high windows illuminates the faces of visitors while leaving Egyptian participants partially shadowed, making it easier to observe foreign reactions while concealing their own responses. Decorative elements throughout the chamber convey messages about Egyptian wealth and cultural sophistication, that reinforce the kingdom's international prestige. Nefertiti's participation in these commercial discussions demonstrates knowledge of trade practices, currency values, and market conditions that surprises the foreign merchants who had expected to deal primarily with male officials focused on political rather than economic considerations. Her questions reveal understanding of production techniques, transportation logistics, and quality control measures that enable her to negotiate terms favorable to Egyptian interests, while maintaining the appearance of fair dealing that encourages continued commercial relationships. But the most crucial aspect of these negotiations involves the information warfare taking place beneath the surface of routine commercial discussions. Each question the merchants ask provides insights into their real interests and concerns. Each response Nefertiti provides is calculated to convey specific impressions about Egyptian capabilities while concealing information that could be used to Egypt's disadvantage. The apparent simplicity of discussing textile prices and delivery schedules masks a complex intelligence operation that could influence international relationships for generations. The Mesopotamian visitors depart with trade agreements that appear mutually beneficial, but they also carry carefully crafted impressions about Egyptian strength, stability, and strategic priorities that serve Nefertiti's broader objectives for managing international relationships during a period of revolutionary change. Their reports to their own rulers will influence foreign policy decisions that could either support or threaten Egyptian security and the long-term viability of the reforms being implemented throughout the kingdom. As evening approaches, Nefertiti prepares for the most dangerous activity of her day. Tonight she will participate in a clandestine ceremony that officially does not exist and could never be acknowledged by the royal court. In a hidden chamber deep beneath the palace, representatives from reform movements throughout the ancient world will gather to formalize agreements that could transform human civilization or trigger conflicts that destroy everything they hope to achieve. The underground chamber where this meeting takes place was constructed during the earliest phases of Akhenaten's development, its existence known only to the most trusted members of Nefertiti's inner circle. The room itself reflects the revolutionary principles that guide her thinking, with simple furnishings that emphasize function over ceremonial display, and lighting designed to create an atmosphere of equality rather than hierarchy. Here, the traditional protocols that govern interactions between rulers and subjects give way to collaborative relationships based on shared commitment to transformational change. The participants who gather for tonight's ceremony represent the most extraordinary assembly of revolutionary thinkers in ancient history. A Buddhist monk from distant Asian kingdoms sits beside a Celtic druid whose knowledge of natural philosophy challenges conventional understanding of reality. A Jewish mystic whose theological insights anticipate developments that won't emerge publicly for centuries shares ideas with an Egyptian priest who has abandoned traditional religious practices to embrace reformed spirituality. What unites these diverse individuals is not shared cultural background or common political interests, but rather their recognition that human civilization has reached a critical juncture where traditional approaches to social organization and spiritual understanding no longer serve the needs of evolving human consciousness. Their collaboration represents the first attempt in recorded history to create international networks dedicated to systematic transformation of human society based on principles that transcend tribal loyalties and sectarian boundaries. Nefertiti's role in coordinating this unprecedented gathering demonstrates the evolution of her thinking from Egyptian queen focused on domestic reform to visionary leader whose objectives encompass the transformation of human civilization itself. Her opening remarks acknowledge the extraordinary nature of their collaboration while emphasizing the practical challenges they face in implementing changes that challenge established power structures throughout the known world. The ceremony that follows combines elements from multiple spiritual traditions while avoiding the sectarian conflicts that typically prevent cooperation between different religious communities. Participants share insights from their own cultural backgrounds while seeking common ground that could support collaborative efforts to promote human development and social justice. The discussions reveal possibilities for human cooperation that won't be seriously attempted again for centuries or millennia. Most significantly, the gathering establishes formal communication networks that will enable continued coordination between reform movements separated by vast distances and cultural differences. The methods they develop for sharing information, coordinating activities, and providing mutual support create the foundation for international cooperation that transcends the limitations of ancient transportation and communication technologies. As the ceremony concludes, with commitments to specific actions that participants will undertake in their own territories, Nefertiti recognizes that she has helped initiate changes that extend far beyond Egyptian borders to encompass the future development of human civilization itself. The teenage girl who entered the royal court with intelligence as her primary asset has become the architect of revolutionary transformation that could influence human development for thousands of years. The participants depart through separate routes that conceal their identities and destinations, carrying with them plans for activities that could either elevate human civilization to unprecedented heights or trigger conflicts that destroy the foundations of organized society. Their success or failure will depend largely on the continued leadership and support that Nefertiti provides through her unique position as the world's most powerful woman ruler. But as she returns to her private chambers in the hours before dawn, the Queen understands that her own position has become increasingly precarious as the scope of her activities expands beyond what any single individual can safely manage. The intelligence networks she has created provide her with unprecedented knowledge about threats and opportunities throughout the ancient world. But they also make her a target for enemies who recognize that eliminating her could disrupt revolutionary movements across multiple kingdoms. The weight of these responsibilities shapes her final activities of the night as she reviews security reports and updates contingency plans that could protect her closest associates if circumstances force her to disappear from public life. The preparations she makes tonight reflect her growing awareness that the revolutionary changes she has helped initiate may require her to sacrifice her visible role as Egyptian queen in order to continue serving the broader cause of human transformation from positions that history will never record. The oil lamps burn low as Nefertiti contemplates a future that may require her to abandon everything she has achieved as Queen of Egypt in order to preserve and extend innovations that could benefit humanity for generations yet unborn. The woman who has reached the pinnacle of ancient political achievement faces the possibility that her greatest contributions to human civilization may require her to disappear from history itself, becoming a hidden force whose influence shapes human development through channels that will never bear her name or acknowledge her contributions. The first light of dawn filters through her chamber windows as she completes preparations for what may be among her final days as the visible ruler of revolutionary Egypt. The transformations she has helped orchestrate have reached a point where they no longer depend entirely on her personal leadership, but they still require careful guidance through the critical transition period that will determine whether her innovations become permanent features of human civilization or merely ambitious experiments that could not survive the eternal human tendency to revert to familiar patterns and traditional authorities. No, reiterate have on her personal leadership Egypt. The transformed a point where they'd entirely longer depanations she has helped orchestrate, but they still determine whether her requi, be careful the critical period that will through permanent features of human civilization, or merely ambitious guidance, become transition innovations experiments that could not survive the eternal human tendency to revert to familiar patterns and traditional authorities. The morning that would mark the beginning of Nefertiti's most audacious gamble dawned like any other in Akhetaten, but the queen who rose to greet it carried secrets that would have shattered the ancient world if discovered. As her servants performed the familiar rituals of royal preparation, applying the cosmetics that had become her signature, and arranging the blue crown that proclaimed her divine authority, none could have suspected that the woman they served was orchestrating her own disappearance from history. The plan she had developed during months of clandestine meetings required precision that would challenge the most skilled military commander. every detail of her daily routine had been analyzed and modified to create opportunities for activities that officially did not exist. The servants who attended her morning bath had been carefully selected for their loyalty and discretion. The guards who protected her chambers followed new rotation schedules that created brief windows when certain corridors remained unobserved. Even the timing of her meals had been adjusted to accommodate meetings that could never appear on any official schedule. As she moved through her morning audiences with provincial administrators and foreign diplomats, Nefertiti conducted two entirely separate conversations simultaneously. The public discussion addressed routine matters of governance and diplomacy that maintained the appearance of normal royal activity. But beneath this surface performance, a more crucial dialogue unfolded through subtle gestures, carefully chosen words, and meaningful silences that conveyed information about revolutionary networks spreading throughout the ancient world. The visiting Syrian ambassador, who presented gifts of rare spices and precious fabrics, had no idea that the Queen's gracious acceptance of his offerings included coded messages about safe passage routes for refugees fleeing religious persecution in distant kingdoms. Her questions about trade conditions in Mediterranean ports contained instructions for establishing new communication networks that could coordinate reform activities across vast territories. Even her compliments about the quality of Syrian craftsmanship carried information about financial resources that would soon become available for supporting revolutionary movements. These multi-layered communications required extraordinary mental discipline, as Nefertiti managed complex information flows while maintaining the serene composure expected from Egyptian royalty. The skills she had developed through years of palace intrigue now served purposes that extended far beyond personal advancement to encompass the transformation of human civilization itself. Her ability to conduct simultaneous conversations at multiple levels of meaning demonstrated intellectual capabilities that few rulers in any historical period have possessed. The afternoon brought more dangerous challenges as she received reports from intelligence agents whose very existence represented treason against established governments throughout the ancient world. The documents they delivered contained evidence of growing opposition to traditional religious and political authorities in kingdoms stretching from Mesopotamia to the Atlantic coast. Local rulers who had initially dismissed Egyptian reforms as temporary aberrations were beginning to recognize that revolutionary ideas were taking root among their own populations. These intelligence reports revealed both encouraging progress and alarming threats as reform movements gained momentum while triggering increasingly violent resistance from established power structures. Priests who had lost influence to simplified religious practices were organizing armed resistance in multiple territories. Aristocratic families whose privileges depended on traditional social hierarchies were forming alliances that transcended national boundaries. Most ominously, several foreign rulers were apparently coordinating military preparations that could target Egypt as the source of dangerous innovations threatening their authority. Nefertiti studied these reports with the analytical intensity of a general preparing for the most important campaign of her career. But unlike conventional military conflicts that could be resolved through superior force or strategic maneuvering, the battles she now faced required weapons that had never been tested in human history. The power of ideas, the loyalty of true believers, and the irresistible appeal of genuine justice would determine victory or defeat in struggles that could reshape human consciousness itself. Her response to these challenges demonstrated the extraordinary evolution of her strategic thinking, from Egyptian queen, focused on domestic concerns, to global revolutionary, whose objectives encompass the liberation of human potential throughout the known world. The orders she issued that afternoon established new networks for protecting reformist leaders, created financial mechanisms for supporting revolutionary activities, and initiated diplomatic contacts with sympathetic elements in foreign governments who shared her vision of transformed human society. The most crucial decision involved activating contingency plans that had been developed for exactly this type of crisis. If traditional authorities throughout the ancient world were indeed coordinating efforts to destroy Egyptian reforms and eliminate their supporters, then Nefertiti's continued visibility as queen made her the primary target for assassination or military attack. Her survival and the preservation of revolutionary networks required her to disappear from public life, while maintaining her influence through channels that enemies could not identify or attack. The preparations for this disappearance had been underway for months, involving the creation of alternative identities, secure communication methods, and safe houses throughout territories where reform movements maintained active operations. The woman who had achieved unprecedented power as Egyptian queen would sacrifice that visible authority to become something even more dangerous to established orders throughout the ancient world. A hidden coordinator of revolutionary transformation whose influence would be felt without being detected. As evening settled over Akhenaten, Nefertiti began implementing the final phases of her plan with actions that would baffle historians for millennia. Her participation in the night's religious ceremonies followed familiar patterns that reassured observers about her continued commitment to routine royal duties. But the prayers she offered to Aten contained coded instructions for trusted allies who would assume responsibility for maintaining Egyptian reforms during her absence from public life. The banquet that followed these religious observances provided cover for the most delicate aspect of her disappearance strategy. As guests celebrated another day of prosperity under reformed administration, servants loyal to Nefertiti moved through the palace, executing predetermined procedures that would enable her transformation from visible queen to invisible revolutionary. Documents that could reveal her underground activities were secured or destroyed. Personal possessions that might provide clues about her whereabouts were carefully redistributed. Most crucially, trusted associates received final instructions about their roles in maintaining the illusion of her continued presence, while she established new bases of operation in territories where her enemies would never think to search. The psychological challenge of abandoning everything she had achieved as Egyptian queen tested Nefertiti's commitment to ideals that transcended personal ambition. The palace that had been her home for over a decade contained memories of triumphs and defeats that had shaped her into history's most influential woman ruler. The servants who had attended her daily needs represented relationships that had provided emotional support during the most challenging periods of her reign. The very chambers where she had planned revolutionary changes bore witness to intellectual achievements that few humans in any era have equaled. Yet as she moved through these familiar spaces for what might be the final time, Nefertiti felt not loss, but liberation, as she prepared to exchange the limitations of visible authority for the unlimited possibilities of hidden influence. The teenage girl who had entered the royal court with intelligence as her only asset had learned that true power often operates most effectively when it remains invisible to those who might oppose or constrain it. The final hours before her disappearance were spent in activities that would perplex future archaeologists and historians who would search desperately for clues about what happened to history's most enigmatic queen. She visited construction sites where workers were completing projects that would serve as monuments to reformed Egyptian civilization. She inspected agricultural facilities that demonstrated new techniques for feeding growing populations. She reviewed military installations that protected revolutionary achievements against foreign threats. Each of these inspections served dual purposes, providing her with final assessments of Egyptian capabilities, while creating alibis that would confuse anyone trying to determine exactly when and how she vanished from recorded history. Her conversations with workers, farmers, and soldiers included both routine expressions of royal satisfaction and carefully encoded farewell messages for those who had supported her revolutionary vision. The most poignant moment came during her final visit to the educational facilities, where young Egyptians were learning to think critically about inherited traditions, while developing skills necessary for continued innovation and adaptation. These students represented the future of reformed Egyptian society and the ultimate justification for all the risks she had taken to create better conditions for human development. Her presence among them that night carried special significance as she prepared to sacrifice her visible role in their education for the sake of broader influences that could benefit countless generations yet unborn. As midnight approached, Nefertiti made her way to the hidden chamber, where the most trusted members of her inner circle waited to bid farewell to the queen they had served and welcome the anonymous revolutionary who would continue their shared mission from positions that history would never record. The transformation that took place in that underground room represented one of the most extraordinary moments in human history, as the world's most powerful woman voluntarily relinquished visible authority to pursue objectives that served humanity rather than personal glory. The robes she discarded carried the weight of royal tradition and divine authority that had elevated her above every other woman in the ancient world. The simple garments she assumed marked her rebirth as something unprecedented in human experience, a leader whose influence would shape civilizational development while remaining forever hidden from conventional historical records. The crown that had symbolized her unprecedented achievements as Egyptian queen was carefully preserved for successors who would continue implementing reforms she had initiated, while she prepared to wield forms of power that transcended the limitations of any earthly throne. The farewells exchanged in that hidden chamber were brief but profound, as individuals who had risked everything to support revolutionary transformation acknowledged that their greatest achievements still lay ahead. The networks they had created would survive and expand under new leadership, while their original architect operated from positions that provided even greater opportunities for advancing human development throughout the known world. As the first light of dawn began to filter through palace windows, the chamber stood empty, except for carefully arranged artifacts that would puzzle investigators for thousands of years. The queen who had transformed Egyptian civilization and initiated changes that would influence human development for millennia had vanished as mysteriously as she had originally appeared in the historical record, leaving behind only questions that would intrigue scholars long after the civilization she had served had crumbled into desert sand. But somewhere in the awakening world, a figure whose identity would never be recorded began the next phase of humanity's most ambitious experiment in conscious evolution. The teenage concubine who had systematically transformed herself in history's most influential woman ruler had achieved her ultimate metamorphosis, becoming a force for human liberation that would operate beyond the reach of any earthly authority while working to fulfill possibilities that few people in any era have even dared to imagine. The mystery of Nefertiti's disappearance would endure as one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. But the changes she had initiated would continue spreading throughout the ancient world and beyond, carried by networks of dedicated individuals who shared her vision of human society organized around principles of justice, wisdom, and compassion, rather than mere power and tradition. Her greatest achievement was not the unprecedented authority she had wielded as Egyptian queen, but rather her recognition that true leadership sometimes requires the courage to disappear from history itself in order to serve ideals that transcend personal recognition or conventional success. The woman whose name meant "the beautiful one has come" had given humanity a glimpse of possibilities that would inspire revolutionary thinkers for thousands of years, while remaining forever hidden from the historical records that celebrated lesser achievements by more conventional rulers. Her legacy lived not in monuments or inscriptions, but in the transformed consciousness of individuals throughout the ancient world who had learned that human society could be organized around love rather than fear, cooperation rather than domination, and wisdom rather than mere tradition. Order to serve Ida Beautiful requires the courage to disappear from history itself, in success names that transcend personal recognition. The woman whose or conventional come the immense of possibilities had given glimpse one has humanity had inspired to that were revolutionary hinkers for thousands remaining of years, while records lesser that celebrate forever hidden from the historical legacy live or INSC in monuments rulers. Heard not conventional more achievements by Riptians, but in the transformed consciousness of individuals' world who had learned that throughout. Rather than mere tradition, the ancient human, rather than domed around love society, could be organize a nation, and wisdom rather than fear, cooperation. The decades that followed would reveal the true genius of Nefertiti's strategy as whispers began emerging from the most unexpected corners of the ancient world. In the trading posts of distant Phoenician colonies, merchants spoke of a mysterious woman who appeared at crucial moments to mediate disputes between rival factions. Her knowledge of languages, customs, and commercial practices seemed impossible for any single individual to possess. Yet her interventions consistently produced peaceful solutions that benefited all parties involved. In the mountain villages of Anatolia, shepherds told stories of a healer who arrived during times of plague or famine, bringing not just medical knowledge, but also new techniques for agriculture and animal husbandry that transformed subsistence communities into thriving settlements. Her methods combined Egyptian innovations with local wisdom in ways that suggested deep understanding of how different cultures could learn from each other, without sacrificing their essential identities. The mystery deepened when similar reports emerged from regions separated by thousands of miles and multiple seasons of travel. A woman matching her description appeared among Celtic tribes, learning new metalworking techniques in Mesopotamian cities, establishing schools for orphaned children, and in Nubian settlements developing irrigation systems that doubled crop yields. The consistency of these accounts across vast distances and cultural boundaries suggested either an impossible network of coordinated imposters or the activities of someone who had transcended normal limitations of time and geography. What made these reports particularly intriguing was their focus on educational and technological innovations rather than political or military activities. Unlike conventional rulers, who extended their influence through conquest or alliance, this mysterious figure seemed dedicated to spreading knowledge and practical skills that empowered local populations to improve their own conditions. Her interventions strengthened existing communities rather than creating dependencies that would require continued external support. The morning routine in a small Aegean fishing village provides glimpses into how these transformational encounters actually unfolded. The villagers rise before dawn to prepare their nets and boats for another day of uncertain labor, in waters that have grown less productive with each passing season. Fish populations have declined, storms have become more frequent, and competition from larger settlements has made it increasingly difficult to maintain their traditional way of life. But this morning brings an unexpected visitor, whose arrival will change everything for this struggling community. A woman of indeterminate age walks down from the hills carrying a leather satchel that contains tools and materials unlike anything the villagers have seen before. Her clothing suggests foreign origins, but her manner conveys familiarity with coastal life that puts the fishermen at ease, despite their natural suspicion of strangers. She speaks their dialect with subtle accent that suggests extensive travel, asking questions about their fishing methods, boat construction, and preservation techniques that reveals sophisticated understanding of maritime challenges. Her inquiries focus not on extracting information for her own benefit, but on understanding local conditions well enough to offer assistance that respects existing knowledge while introducing innovations that could improve results. The conversation that develops around the morning preparation activities demonstrates her remarkable ability to learn quickly while teaching subtly. She observes how the fishermen repair their nets, then suggests modifications to the weaving pattern that would increase durability while reducing weight. Her recommendations emerge naturally from the discussion, rather than being imposed as superior alternatives to established practices. As the boats prepare to depart for the day's fishing, she requests permission to accompany them, offering to help with routine tasks in exchange for opportunities to observe their techniques firsthand. The fishermen agree partly from curiosity and partly from recognition that her questions reveal genuine interest in their welfare rather than idle tourism or academic study. The day at sea provides extended opportunities for the kind of detailed observation and subtle instruction that characterizes all her interventions. She works alongside experienced fishermen, learning their methods while sharing insights about ocean currents, weather patterns, and fish behavior that reflect knowledge gathered from coastal communities throughout the Mediterranean world. Her contributions improve the day's catch while teaching principles that will benefit future fishing expeditions. But her most significant impact comes through conversations that occur during the quiet periods between active fishing. She shares stories about communities that face similar challenges and discovered innovative solutions through experimentation and cooperation. These narratives provide both practical information and psychological encouragement, as the villagers recognize that their problems are neither unique nor insurmountable. The techniques she describes for fish preservation, boat maintenance, and navigation represent combinations of methods from different cultures, adapted to local conditions and resources. Her approach emphasizes learning from diverse sources while maintaining the cultural identity and social cohesion that give communities their strength and resilience during difficult periods. As evening approaches and the boats return to harbor with their most successful catch in months, the villagers begin to understand that they have encountered someone extraordinary. Her knowledge extends far beyond fishing to encompass agriculture, crafts, trade relationships, and social organization in ways that suggest lifetimes of experience compressed into a single individual. The community gathering that takes place around the evening cooking fires provides opportunities for more systematic instruction, as she shares specific techniques for improving various aspects of village life. Her teaching methods emphasize hands-on demonstration and collaborative problem-solving, rather than formal lectures or authoritative pronouncements that might create dependencies or undermine local leadership. The young people of the village prove particularly receptive to her innovations, as she introduces them to concepts about navigation, mathematics, and natural philosophy that expand their understanding of the world beyond their immediate environment. Her lessons prepare them to participate more effectively in the broader Mediterranean trading networks, while maintaining their commitment to the community that has nurtured them. The adults benefit from her insights into crop cultivation, animal husbandry, and craft production that could diversify their economic activities and reduce their dependence on increasingly unreliable fishing revenues. Her suggestions respect traditional knowledge, while introducing modifications that reflect lessons learned from communities facing similar transitions throughout the ancient world. The village elders find themselves engaged in discussions about governance, conflict resolution, and community decision-making that help them address challenges created by changing economic conditions and increasing contact with foreign influences. Her perspectives combine practical experience with theoretical understanding in ways that enhance their ability to guide community development while preserving essential cultural values. As the night deepens and the conversations wind down, the mysterious visitor begins preparing for her departure with the same quiet efficiency that characterized her arrival. She packs her tools and materials, while ensuring that the knowledge she has shared will survive and develop after her absence. Written instructions, sketched diagrams, and carefully explained principles provide foundations for continued learning and adaptation. The farewells exchanged with individual villagers reveal the personal connections she has formed during her brief stay, while maintaining the air of mystery that surrounds her identity and ultimate destination. Each person receives specific encouragement related to their particular interests and capabilities, along with suggestions for how they might contribute to the community's continued development. Her final words to the assembled village emphasize themes that appear in all her interventions throughout the ancient world: the importance of learning from diverse sources while maintaining cultural integrity, the value of cooperation and mutual support in addressing challenges that exceed individual capabilities, the possibility that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary results through sustained effort and creative thinking. As dawn breaks over the village, the mysterious visitor has vanished as quietly as she appeared, leaving behind only the transformed understanding and enhanced capabilities that will enable this small community to thrive in ways that seemed impossible just days earlier. The techniques she introduced will spread to neighboring settlements through normal trade and social contacts, multiplying her impact far beyond the direct recipients of her instruction. The pattern repeats itself throughout the Mediterranean world, as similar encounters transform communities from subsistence survival to sustainable prosperity. Each intervention respects local conditions and cultural preferences, while introducing innovations that enhance human capabilities and expand possibilities for cooperative development. The cumulative effect creates networks of improved communities that strengthen regional stability while advancing human knowledge and social organization. These grassroots transformations operate beneath the notice of conventional political authorities who remain focused on traditional concerns about territory, tribute, and military power. The rulers who might have opposed systematic changes to existing social arrangements never recognize the coordinated nature of developments that appear to emerge spontaneously from local initiatives and community creativity. The genius of this approach lies in its sustainability and resistance to suppression by hostile authorities. Unlike political movements that depend on visible leadership and formal organization, these educational and technological innovations become embedded in local practices and transmitted through normal social processes that continue functioning regardless of political circumstances. The woman who orchestrates these transformations remains hidden from historical records while wielding influence that surpasses anything achieved by conventional rulers, whose names dominate ancient chronicles. Her legacy lives not in monuments or inscriptions, but in the enhanced capabilities and expanded consciousness of countless communities, whose development she has guided toward more humane and sustainable patterns of social organization. The fishing village that experienced her intervention represents thousands of similar encounters that collectively reshape human civilization during the centuries following her disappearance from Egyptian records. The teenager who entered the royal court with intelligence as her primary asset has achieved her ultimate transformation, becoming a catalyst for human development whose influence extends throughout space and time, while remaining forever invisible to those who measure achievement through conventional standards of power and recognition. Years pass, and the ripples of her influence continue spreading through channels that historians will never detect or document. In remote monasteries, scholars copy texts that preserve knowledge she helped disseminate. In bustling marketplaces, merchants employ trading practices she refined during her travels. In family workshops, craftsmen use techniques she demonstrated during brief visits that transformed their understanding of their trades. The agricultural innovations she introduced enable communities to support larger populations while maintaining ecological balance. The educational methods she developed help children learn more effectively while preserving cultural traditions. The conflict resolution techniques she taught reduce violence while strengthening social cooperation. Each improvement contributes to the gradual elevation of human civilization toward possibilities that few people in any era have imagined. The winter evening when she visits a small mountain community facing starvation demonstrates how her interventions address immediate crises while building long-term resilience. The villagers have watched their stored grain dwindle as unseasonable weather destroyed their harvest and blocked the mountain passes that connect them to trading centers. Desperation has begun creating tensions that threaten to tear apart social bonds that have sustained the community through previous difficulties. Her arrival coincides with a community meeting where elders debate whether to abandon their ancestral home or attempt to survive until spring on increasingly meager rations. The discussion reveals not just practical challenges about food distribution and resource conservation, but also deep questions about community identity and collective responsibility that will determine whether these people maintain their social cohesion or fragment into competing factions. She listens to the debate with the attention of someone who has encountered similar crises in dozens of other communities, while understanding that each situation requires solutions adapted to specific circumstances and cultural values. Her questions focus on identifying resources that might have been overlooked and exploring possibilities that desperation might have obscured. The inventory of available supplies reveals that the community possesses materials that could be processed into edible forms, using techniques she has learned from communities facing similar challenges in different geographical regions. Tree bark, root vegetables, and wild plants that local knowledge considers inedible can provide essential nutrients when prepared, using methods she demonstrates during the following days. But her most important contribution involves helping the community reorganize their social relationships to maximize cooperation while minimizing conflict during the difficult months ahead. The governance structures that functioned effectively during prosperous times require modifications to address the stress created by scarcity and uncertainty about survival. The council meetings she facilitates create new procedures for decision-making that ensure fair distribution of resources while maintaining the authority structures necessary for community coordination. Her approach balances individual needs with collective welfare in ways that strengthen rather than weaken social bonds during the crisis period. The educational activities she organizes for children and young adults serve multiple purposes during the long winter months when outdoor work becomes impossible. The knowledge she shares about mathematics, natural philosophy, and practical skills provides preparation for more effective participation in community life, while creating shared intellectual activities that maintain morale during the darkest period of the year. The adults benefit from her insights into food preservation, tool maintenance, and shelter improvement that maximize the utility of available resources while preparing for the challenges of spring planting and community rebuilding. Her teaching methods emphasize collaborative learning and mutual support that reinforce social cooperation while developing individual capabilities. The storytelling sessions that occupy the evening hours combine entertainment with education as she shares narratives about communities that survived similar challenges and achieved greater prosperity through sustained effort and creative adaptation. These stories provide both practical information and psychological encouragement while reinforcing cultural values that maintain community identity during periods of stress and change. As winter gradually gives way to spring, the community has not merely survived, but actually grown stronger through the shared experience of overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The techniques they have learned and the social relationships they have developed provide foundations for greater prosperity and resilience than they possessed before the crisis that threatened their existence. Her departure coincides with the first successful planting season the community has experienced in several years, as the agricultural innovations she introduced combine with improved social organization to produce results that exceed their most optimistic expectations. The village that faced extinction just months earlier has become a model of sustainable development that will attract visitors from neighboring communities seeking to learn from their success. The pattern continues repeating itself throughout the ancient world as her interventions transform crisis into opportunity, while building human capabilities that serve both immediate needs and long-term development. Each community she visits becomes a center for spreading innovations that benefit broader regions through normal processes of trade, intermarriage, and cultural exchange. The cumulative impact of these grassroots transformations creates conditions for civilizational advancement that operate independently of political systems and survive changes in governmental leadership. The knowledge and social practices she has helped develop become embedded in local traditions that persist across generations while continuing to evolve and adapt to changing circumstances. The woman who achieved unprecedented power as Egyptian queen has transcended the limitations of any earthly throne to become something far more significant in human history. Her influence shapes the development of human consciousness and social organization in ways that will continue reverberating through the centuries, while her identity remains forever hidden from those who measure achievement through conventional standards of fame and recognition. The mystery of her disappearance will endure as one of history's greatest puzzles, but the transformation she initiated will continue spreading throughout the world, carried by countless individuals who have been touched by her wisdom without ever knowing her name or understanding the full scope of her extraordinary mission to elevate human civilization toward its highest possibilities. Leadership of political systems and survive changes social. The knowledge and governmental practices embedded in local traditions she has helped develop become a cross that persist adapt to changing circumstances. The woman unprecedented generations while continuing to evolve, and power transcended the limitations of any earthly as Egyptian queen has throne who achieved to become something far more significant in human history. Her influence, the shapes berating through the centuries. Rever consciousness organization in ways that will continue development of human and social individuals who havels, but the transform while her identity and recognition. The mystery bin who measure achievement through conventional standards of famed will continue spreading throughout the world remains forever hidden. From those of her disappearance will endure as one of history's greatest puzzled. Carried by countless Asians, she initiate full scope of her extraordinary to elev touched by her wisdom 8 human civilization toward its without mission, the highest possibilities. Ever knowing her name or understanding, the echoes of her influence continue to ripple outward through pathways that would never appear in any royal chronicle or temple inscription. In the sprawling markets of Damascus, where merchants from a dozen different kingdoms gathered to exchange goods and gossip, a particular booth had gained an unusual reputation. The elderly woman who operated it seemed to possess an impossible knowledge of trade routes, currency fluctuations, and the subtle art of negotiation that turned simple transactions into opportunities for mutual prosperity. Her customers noticed how she could speak to Syrian silk merchants in their own dialect, discuss Mesopotamian bronze-working techniques with craftsmen from distant cities, and offer insights about Nubian gold that revealed intimate familiarity with mining operations thousands of miles away. Yet she never claimed extensive travels or boasted about her connections. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions that helped others solve their own problems while quietly sharing innovations that improved their business practices. The morning ritual at her booth began before sunrise, as she arranged samples of goods that represented the finest craftsmanship from across the known world. Each item had been selected not just for its beauty or rarity, but for the story it could tell about the techniques and materials that had created it. A piece of Syrian glassware demonstrated new methods for achieving colors that had previously been impossible. An Egyptian textile revealed weaving patterns that produced stronger fabric using less raw material. Her conversations with early customers served multiple purposes beyond simple commerce. She learned about political developments, economic conditions, and social changes throughout the regions they represented, while sharing insights that could help them navigate challenges they were facing in their own territories. These exchanges created informal networks of mutual support that strengthened trade relationships while spreading beneficial innovations across cultural boundaries. The young apprentice who assisted her had noticed patterns in these interactions that puzzled him despite months of careful observation. She seemed to know exactly which customers would be interested in particular items before they even approached her booth. Her suggestions about trade routes and timing consistently proved more accurate than information provided by professional merchants who had spent decades building their expertise through direct experience. Most mysteriously, she occasionally received visitors who came not to purchase goods, but to engage in whispered conversations conducted in languages the apprentice could not identify. These individuals arrived at irregular intervals, always alone, and departed carrying small packages that appeared to contain documents rather than merchandise. Their meetings followed no predictable schedule, yet she always seemed prepared for their arrival. The midday heat brought different types of customers as local residents sought relief from the sun, while browsing goods they could never afford during normal economic circumstances. She welcomed these visitors with the same attention she devoted to wealthy foreign merchants, often finding ways to make valuable items accessible through creative payment arrangements that served the needs of both parties. Her interactions with local children revealed another dimension of her mysterious activities, as she taught them games that actually provided instruction in mathematics, geography, and practical skills that would serve them throughout their lives. The wooden toys she gave away contained educational elements that helped young minds develop analytical abilities while providing entertainment that kept them occupied during their parents' business negotiations. The afternoon brought scholars and intellectuals who had heard rumors about her extraordinary knowledge of subjects ranging from natural philosophy to historical events that most people had forgotten or never learned. These conversations took place in a section of her booth arranged to provide privacy while maintaining the appearance of routine commercial activity. The discussions that unfolded during these scholarly visits covered topics that would have been considered dangerous in many political contexts. Questions about governance, justice, and social organization that challenged conventional assumptions about how human societies should function. Explorations of religious and philosophical concepts that transcended the boundaries established by traditional authorities. Her responses demonstrated familiarity with texts and ideas from cultures separated by vast distances and centuries of historical development. She could discuss Greek philosophical concepts with the same fluency she brought to Egyptian theological principles or Mesopotamian legal traditions. Yet her knowledge never seemed academic or detached from practical concerns about how these ideas could be applied to improve actual human conditions. The evening hours brought the most intriguing visitors as darkness provided cover for meetings that required absolute secrecy. Representatives from reform movements throughout the ancient world would appear at predetermined times to receive instructions, share intelligence, and coordinate activities that were gradually transforming human civilization from within existing power structures. These clandestine gatherings revealed the true scope of the network she had created during her decades of hidden influence. Agents operating in royal courts, religious institutions, and commercial enterprises throughout the Mediterranean world reported on developments that could affect their collaborative efforts to promote human development and social justice. The information they shared painted a picture of accelerating change as communities that had received her direct assistance began influencing their neighbors through normal processes of cultural exchange and economic cooperation. Agricultural techniques were spreading faster than their originators had anticipated. Educational methods were being adapted to local conditions while maintaining their essential effectiveness. Conflict resolution practices were reducing violence while strengthening social bonds in regions where warfare had previously been endemic. But the reports also revealed growing opposition as traditional authorities began recognizing the coordinated nature of changes they had initially dismissed as isolated local developments. Priestly establishments in multiple kingdoms were sharing information about threats to their authority and resources. Aristocratic families were forming alliances that transcended national boundaries to protect privileges that reformed societies no longer supported. And so, as we drift toward the end of our journey through the sands of time, we leave Nefertiti not as history recorded her, but as she truly was. The beautiful queen who vanished into mystery had achieved something far greater than any throne could offer. Her legacy lived not in stone monuments that crumble with age, but in the transformed hearts and minds of countless souls across the ancient world. From Syrian merchants to Celtic craftsmen, from mountain villages to coastal settlements, her invisible